friends, I'm here with Eaglet. We're going to read another chapter of Frog and Toad Are Friends by Arnold Lobel. Here's the table of contents. Last time we read the first chapter, Spring. This time we'll read the second chapter called The Story. So let's look on page 16. I like how in Frog and Toad, each chapter is its own story with its own problem and solution. Let's see what happens this time. The story. One day in summer, Frog was not feeling well. Toad said, "Frog, you are looking quite green." "But I always look green," said Frog. "I am a frog." "Today you look very green, even for a frog," said Toad. "Get into my bed and rest." Toad made Frog a cup of hot tea. Frog drank the tea and then he said, "Tell me a story while I am resting." "All right," said Toad. "Let me think of a story to tell you." Toad thought and thought, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. "I will go out on the front porch and walk up and down," said Toad. "Perhaps that will help me think of a story." Toad walked up and down on the porch for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad went into the house and stood on his head. "Why are you standing on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I stand on my head, it will help me think of a story," said Toad. Toad stood on his head for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. There's Frog asking Toad why he is standing on his head. And there's Toad. Then Toad poured a glass of water over his head. "Why are you pouring water over your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I pour water over my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad poured many glasses of water over his head, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad began to bang his head against the wall. "Why are you banging your head against the wall?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I bang my head against the wall hard enough, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. "I am feeling much better now, Toad," said Frog. "I do not think I need a story anymore." "Then you get out of bed and let me get into it," said Toad, "because now I feel terrible." Frog said, "Would you like me to tell you a story, Toad?" "Yes," said Toad, "if you know one." There's Frog getting out of bed so Toad can get in bed. "Once upon a time," said Frog, "there were two good friends, a frog and a toad. The frog was not feeling well. He asked his friend the toad to tell him a story. The toad could not think of a story. He walked up and down on the porch, but he could not think of a story. He stood on his head, but he could not think of a story. He poured water over his head, but he could not think of a story. He banged his head against the wall, but he could not think of a story. Then the toad did not feel so well, and the frog was feeling better. So the toad went to bed, and the frog got up and told him a story. The end. How was that, Toad? Said Frog. But Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. Oh my goodness, think about the things that Toad did to try to think of a story to tell Frog. What were some of the silly things he did to try to think of a story? Do you remember? What do you do when you are trying to think of a story? I hope you don't bang your head against the wall. See you next time for the next chapter of Frog and Toad Are Friends.